Good morning, everyone, and welcome to LaGuardia Community College, just in case you didn't know where you were at. My name is Craig Green. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer here. It's a pleasure to see each and every one of you. And I'm here to introduce you to our most esteemed president, President Kenneth Adams, this morning. But before he comes, we just want to do a little housekeeping, and that is to please turn off your phones. Restrooms are across the hall, and we appreciate that you leave the room as you found it, nice, neat, and clean. Take your coffee cups with you. So this morning, welcome to the Campus Climate Initiative Kickoff. And as I stated, I'd like you to welcome our college president, President Kenneth Adams.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. This is exciting. Long day in coming. I want to recognize Sarah, who is interpreting for us this morning in American Sign Language, who's on the right over here. Hi, Sarah. She'll be followed by her partner in this, Susan Weinstein. Hi, Susan. Our Executive Director of DEI, Wendy Nicholson, also signs in ASL, so if you see her signing, she may be called to duty. In any event, thanks again, Craig. Welcome everyone to LaGuardia's Campus Climate Initiative kickoff event. Today we celebrate our college's efforts in the advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I want to thank, of course, Wendy Nicholson, who is our Executive Director of DEI, for her effort to lead in the coordination of this event today, and what is going to be a series of events that are scheduled over the length of this spring semester as we continue to stand as Yes, 1LaGuardia. That's the slogan and the theme you're going to hear all through the semester. LaGuardia Community College is committed to the education of our students as well as the support of our faculty and staff. And our strong and active commitment to diversity helps to ensure that differing views are welcomed, expressed, and heard, and that learning and open discourse can thrive here at LaGuardia. Our DEI efforts begin in the classroom, so it's great to have a lot of faculty here today and others participating via Zoom. But they continue throughout the college community and beyond, engaging multiple perspectives and viewpoints and embracing the opportunity for deep, important conversations on both ongoing issues and topics of the day. The unique thoughts, insights, and questions each of us can bring to these discussions only strengthens our community. Now, I've been at LaGuardia for about 2.5 years, and since I've arrived, I have continued to be inspired by the willingness of our campus community to talk openly and honestly about challenges and opportunities connected to this advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The credit for this work is really to all of you, students, faculty, and staff, and administrators, all of you who are so committed and who are driving this positive change. We're dedicated to the recruitment and retention of a diverse community of students, faculty, and staff who bring a wide range of backgrounds and perspectives and views to this campus. Today's kickoff event is just the beginning of an opportunity for all of us, faculty, staff, students, to participate in this series that Wendy again calls the Campus Climate Series, which is really part of a CUNY-wide Campus Climate Initiative happening across 25 CUNY institutions, community colleges, four-year colleges, and graduate schools. So this is our version, again, of a CUNY initiative called the Campus Climate Initiative. And with it, we have activities that Wendy's planning with her colleagues all across the campus and all across the semester. There are going to be lectures and workshops, along with artwork and a video contest, which I know is going to be explained in a little while. We hope you will share your creativity and your points of view through these exercises and activities. I want to thank our special guest this morning, Rabbi Mira Rivera, Joyce Moy, who I think Joyce is, can you hear us okay, Joyce? Joyce is connected to us for logistical reasons by Zoom today, and Dr. Kevin Jordan, Thank you, Kevin, for coming back to LaGuardia and a little old home week, a visit with us today. Good to hear from you. We'll see you in a little while. And again, a big shout out, a special thanks to my friend and colleague, 1 Nicholson, our Executive Director of DEI, who's organized this event and who's organizing the entire set of campus climate activities. And I know Wendy wanted me to thank Manny Rivera, Laura Bartovics, and others on her team who've helped put this all together. So thank you again for being here. Thank you to those who are viewing this online. And I hope we all have a wonderful event and then continue to work on this with Wendy and everyone else throughout the semester. Thanks very much.
Thank you, President Adams. We appreciate your remarks. Now, I would like to introduce some of our affinity group leaders here at the college that you will have an opportunity to work with, be a part of. They're going to tell you a little bit about their background and make mental notes, because when they do have a meeting or a function, you should reach out and join these events and support them. So starting off, we would like to have brief remarks, and you'll come up in this order. Tony Foy of Faculty and Staff of Color Collective, Koyoko Toyama, Asian American Pacific Island Heritage Committee, and Ryan Mann Hamilton of La Casa. Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm Tony Foy, and I am part of the Faculty and Staff of Color Leadership. Actually, I was in former leadership. This collective came about after we had a workshop that was called Difficult Dialogues. And through those dialogues, many things came to light. And one of the things is we needed to talk more about injustice, racial injustice, and how do we do that in a safe space. So the Faculty and Staff of Color, and I see some of the membership here, shout out, hey, who are here. And before I do anything, I'm going to just say this before I forget. On March 23rd, there is going to be a meeting, and you'll have more, we'll send out more information about that. So I was asked by Rosemary Talmadge and Stephen Hitt if I would be willing to co-chair the committee, a committee, we didn't have a name yet, to talk about these issues, along with Professor Vanessa Bing, who is right now, she's on sabbatical. And after that, Jason Hendrickson took on a leadership role, and he stepped back a little bit. So that's just a little bit about that. So one of the things that was so wonderful about this meeting was the first one we had. So many things came to light that even I didn't know. But out of those things that came to light came some action. Because we said, what are we going to do about all these things that we're talking about? The disparities, the what's going on with the students of color, and how do we talk about other inequities alongside the racial inequities. So some of the things I'd like to point out for you, forgive me for looking at my notes, that, well, we can start off with, we now have a diversity, equity, and inclusion director, which actually came directly out of the things that we were doing. There's also, during our student, our actually, new student orientation, we had workshops or talks, and also for when we come back for our own orientation, the faculty and staff, we had workshops that we developed. Through all of these workshops, other things would come to light. One of the big, I want to just highlight a few things. The President's Advisory Committee, this Senate Subcommittee, which had several different workshops, including workshops on implicit bias and we had the breaking of the bread, and breaking the bread and breaking barriers. And we also participated in opening sessions with several different workshops. And all of these workshops, we would discuss how, when they're needed, how they're needed, and why we're doing it at that time. What I wanted to talk about my own experience briefly is there were so many things that many of us feel that are issues that are not discussed, especially around Black and brown faculty and students. And we knew, and I felt that in this environment I could be open, and from that openness was not just wasn't just spewing bitterness, but actually sitting down and discussing how can we work together with where we are in the college to make it better. And I think that, please join us for our meeting. You will see how you can be impacted. And we work together with SURGE, which is, I believe the acronym is showing up for racial justice. And even together we came up with wonderful workshops. So please consider joining one of these groups, or that, as was mentioned earlier, because you mentioned the groups, and see how you can be committed and not just us talking, but doing action. And thank you, Wendy, for inviting me and us to talk about this.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kyoko Toyama, and I'm a faculty counselor in the College Discovery Program in the counseling department. I have been a part of the LaGuardia community for more than 35 years, and have been nurtured as part of the Third World Faculty and Staff Association. There was such a thing. It's no longer there, but now Collect is really picking up where we left off. And also CUNY-wide, Ari, Joyce was the executive director. This is the Asian American Research Institute of CUNY. I was really nurtured by the organization. So in many years at LaGuardia, the efforts to support faculty, staff, and students, and to promote the needs and interests of us has continued through Asian Heritage Celebration every spring. But no particular affinity group of our sort of Asian Americans existed. This is sort of a parallel to our general stance of assimilation and not making waves, which is embedded in most of our Asian cultural values. But in the spring semester of 2020, the role of the AAPI, faculty and staff, have changed drastically, receiving many messages asking what to do and how to support our students of Asian descent because they started to feel threatened in the neighborhood and or on the subway. We too began to feel anxious about our identity and how we look. This was the beginning of Asian hate after the conspiracy theory of the coronavirus being the China virus. Remember this, right? Consequently, an ad hoc group made up of Professor Tsao of English, Dr. Richard Lieberman of Archives, and myself began to disseminate information about seminars, town halls, the community rally, and bystander training by Right to Be, formerly called Holaback. I think some of you attended the training. Purely out of our urge. This was not a typical Asian things to do. In the fall 2020, the concerned Asian American faculty and staff members, mostly they're very active in Asian American Heritage Celebration Committee, gathered to talk about the creation of Asian American Faculty and Staff Association. We wanted to stand up and to become visible. In May of 2021, the first meeting was held with the assistance of 2 seasoned faculty members from other CUNY colleges that already established such an organization, with Joyce as our consultant and friend. We discussed our direction and mission of the group, which is based on a commitment to education, social justice, and support to all, including creating a clearinghouse for the college regarding mentoring, advocacy, resource, and developing data bank, training, and research. We also recognize the importance of solidarity with our fellow peer groups, associations, institutes, and centers and student organizations. We plan to connect with other colleges and RE in the future too. Even during the COVID, we continue to have a celebration online, this Asian American heritage, maintaining our tradition with mini conferences with Asian American politicians, as well as training on mental health issues of Asian Americans with Federation of Asian Americans. This annual event of LaGuardia features various cultural, philosophical, and linguistic heritage from Asian countries. Now, our AAPI committee is made up of both Asians, Asian Americans, and non-Asian Americans, and non-Asian students and volunteers at various programs of AAPI Celebration Month in May, which is dedicated to as a National Asian American Heritage Month. We are committed to promoting Asian American groups on campus, and Wendy has been very much part of our efforts, and I'm happy about her position and her expertise, and thanks to President Adams to create that office, which is very important for all of us. Our mini conference and final celebration are intended to provide the college with a wonderful array of educational, cultural, and engaging programs that will heighten the awareness and contribution of Asian American groups in New York City. And I see a lot of students today, so if you want to get involved, May 4th, that's a mini conference on Thursday, pretty much all day. And May 11th, Wednesday, the celebration outside. I'm sure some of you have come. If you're interested in joining, look for me, okay? Give me your contact information, and I will have you come to volunteer. So please join, all of you, this coming May as part of our celebration by attending yourself, and also bringing students, thanks to your faculty who brought your class today. So we can have a discussion around the mosaic of this country and become the change we want to see. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. I like that. Buenos días a todos también. My name is Ryan Mann Hamilton. I'm a professor in anthropology and also Latin American studies. For those of you who don't know, we have a Latin American studies option at LaGuardia. You may be interested in some of these things. And I'm here to represent La Casa de las Americas, which is a new space here at LaGuardia, right? We began literally 9 months ago. And this was an effort that was put forward by President Adams and Nayeli Valencia Torrent, of course, who spearheaded this process of getting us approved as an official center here at CUNY. And so in June of last year, we were approved, and we have been running and hitting the ground running literally with events, collaborations, and everything else as much as possible. So I'm just going to read briefly what our La Casa's mission is, so that you can understand a little bit of the work that we are going to be doing throughout the year, and of course, from here on to the future. Our mission is to provide opportunities for Latinx, Latin American, and Caribbean community members to enter, advance, and excel in multifaceted professional arenas for career and economic upward mobility. We're here to foster understanding of the historical forces that have contributed to the exclusion of various groups that comprise Latin American, Latinx, and Caribbean heritage, and of course, to support the academic and research opportunities in the fields of Latin American, Latinx, and Caribbean studies. And of course, we talk about those communities, but that doesn't mean that it's exclusively for those communities. A lot of the work that we are doing is, again, to acknowledge the historical intricacies of Latin America and the Caribbean, and thinking about, again, the African diaspora, the indigenous diasporas that exist in those spaces as well. The Asian diasporas that were taken to these spaces, right? To collaborate, to think about the coming together in these places historically, but also in the space of New York, right? In this case, Queens. And so what we've been doing really and acknowledging is that, again, we cannot do this work alone. And so this is a wonderful gathering, precisely that, to bring people together, to have us communicate with each other, and of course to expand the work that we can do here at LaGuardia, not just at LaGuardia, but also in Queens and New York City specifically. And so, again, as I mentioned, we can't do this ourselves. And so I do have a few flyers that I'll put over here to the side, so you know, our calendar, our brochures, other events that are going on this week, and so on and so forth. But just to give you a heads up in regards to some of the events we're doing, and of course, who we are collaborating with. We're going to do first generation student support circles, which is with the Women's Center and the LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub. We have events with Dominican Studies Institute, with the Center for Latin American, Caribbean, and Latino Studies Research at the Graduate Center, with the Center for Humanities. With the Black Lives Matter Summit, we are also collaborating with Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. We are collaborating as well with the Hispanic Federation, with LaGuardia Cares, and again, a slew of other folks and departments, people on campus. That is really the work that we want to do, connecting across different barriers, connecting across different spaces, departments, offices, and so on and so forth. And a lot of the work that we've been doing is connecting with the community. And a lot of those folks are interested in coming to LaGuardia and having LaGuardia visit them as well, right? So hopefully this is something that we can do and we will do with the support of course, the President's Office and everyone else on this campus. So I invite you to join us at La Casa. For those students who are out there interested, perhaps, we have La Casa Ambassador positions. We also have a Queens Climate Justice Fellowship program that is being run out of La Casa. And we have an Art Fellows program as well, and our Art Fellows actually just put up a beautiful mural that is decorating our space right now in M141. So please come by, visit the space, let us know. If you're interested in sponsoring an event with us, we can always do that. We're open to collaborations as much as possible. And again, welcome, thank you, and thank you for letting us be a part of this.
Thank you to Tony Foy, Koyoko Toyama, and I really must say this, Ryan Mann Hamilton. I thank you for the energy that you brought, because what I understand this to be is a kickoff. And maybe it's the dim lights in here, maybe it's the weather, but we should be a little bit more enthusiastic about this particular kickoff, this particular initiative. With everything that's going on in the country, in the city, around the world, we need to be motivated, electrified about talking about this subject, this topic, in whatever area that you are in. If this was Wendy Nicholson standing up here, she'd be saying the same thing. You're going to see in a very short moment that our executive director of DEI comes with a whole lot of energy. So let's get ready to have this kickoff. Listen, pay attention, be involved. Going forward, be involved, be involved, be involved. Don't sit back. Have discourse, have disagreements, but come together and let's make this a great kickoff, a great initiative. And now I would like to present to some and introduce to others, as I decrease and she increases, our very own Wendy Nicholson.
Thank you, Chief Green. And if I didn't have the energy, I've got to have it now, don't I? Again, I am Wendy Nicholson. I am the Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I have been in the seat just about 18 months. And as Tony said, it came out of a direct initiative of the work that we've been doing around DEI at the college and the vision of our president, Kenneth Adams. So I'd like to thank Tony and Kyoko and Ryan for their information. Having them come to speak to you today is just a way of introducing to some and also reminding others about the work that we do collaboratively around the college, letting people know that there are different affinity groups that we all could be a part of. And this work that we do is not Wendy's work as the executive director. It's not just the affinity groups' work. It is all of our responsibility to make sure that this environment is welcoming and respectful to all who grace our doors, both physically and virtually. And so today's kickoff is a event that we put together as part of a campus climate grant that we got from CUNY. to address anti-Semitism, anti-Asian hate, and all other forms of bias and discrimination. And so what we decided to engage the entire campus was to create an art competition. And all of you are invited to be a part of it, faculty, staff, students, and administrators, right? The question that you will be answering in your artistic submission is, who are you? In the context of us as a campus community, and also in the context of what this grant is addressing. So you can either put in a paper submission or a digital submission. All the details are on our DEI website under the 1LaGuardia tab. And also you can come to see me in the president's office, E513, for more information. And so today's kickoff, I've assembled a group of dynamic speakers who in their own right, both professionally and personally, are well-versed in this work of DEI, of intersectionality, of the issues that we deal with individually and collectively as a campus, but also in society. And so, because I believe that no one can tell someone else's story, you can talk about their story, but you can't tell it like they can, I'm not gonna read their bios to you. I'm gonna let each of our speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll have an opportunity to have some dialogue. They will give us their words of wisdom, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end where maybe you all might be able to ask a few questions. Is that okay? So Joyce, I wanna start with you. If you would just take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your experience, and why you do this work.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your invitation, and it's great to be with LaGuardians again. I too must confess that I was a former LaGuardian. I was at LaGuardia from about 1997 until 2008. I left in 2008 to become the executive director of the Asian American Asian Research Institute, which is a CUNY-wide organization working with all of the campuses. And I've been fortunate to have been invited back several times, particularly during the month of May, during Asian Heritage Month. Well, let me just tell you a little bit about myself, and this is the kind of stuff that's not in the bio. You know, when I looked at the art competition and so on, and the question was, who are you? I thought about that question and I said, it depends on who's asking, who's looking, and what context we're talking about. But let me share with you the kinds of things that are not normally in my bio. I am the fourth generation of my family in the United States. I cannot say that I am a fourth generation Chinese American because my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father were not permitted to become US citizens because they were born in China. It was because of their Chinese heritage. My children are fifth generation Chinese Americans, and my grandchildren are now sixth generation Asian Americans because my daughter's husbands are of Korean and Taiwanese heritage. So that's something that no one might think of if they were to look at me. As a matter of fact, many Asians will relate to you that they're often given a comment that says, "Oh, you speak English." And my response is normally, "Yeah, so do you." Or somebody will say, "Hey, you don't have an accent." I said, "Yes, I do. I have a New York accent." So these are the kinds of crazy conversations I have. And I was told to go back to China last week by someone whose family, I am sure, has not been here as long as mine. So that's a little bit of some of my background and experiences, again, that you will not see in my bio. Also, a few other things. I grew up, or I went to junior high and high school, and now I guess they call it middle school and high school, in a little village, a 1 square mile village called Roosevelt, which was primarily African American. And one of my first experiences with understanding the racialized nature of this country was when some of my friends asked me to attend church with them. Now, I had grown up in my early years, primarily in the Chinatown area, I had actually not really interacted with many children of different heritage. And so my mother said, you have to go because it's not polite. You have friends and their parents are asking you to join them. You must go. But frankly, I was afraid. I had never stepped foot in a church. I had no idea what you had to do there. So I went because my mother told me I had to do so. And when I went, I was embraced by the community. The people were loving. The women had these gorgeous pastel suits and hats. It was just such a wonderful environment. And eventually, somebody invited me to dinner. And again, I told my mother I did not want to go. We ate with 2 sticks and a spoon. I had no idea what to do with a fork or with a knife. I'm born in the US, and I was yet that marginalized. And again, my mother said, you must go. And if you don't know how to do something, watch everybody else before you do it. So I went, and the question came around, Joyce, where are you from? And I'm about 15 years old, 14 years old, and I said, oh, I'm from New York City. And they looked at me and said, no, where were you from before that? I said, oh, yeah, my parents came from China. And they said, oh, okay. And being my little innocent self, I said, so where are you guys from? And my friend said, oh, we're from the South. I said, oh yeah, just like I'm from New York City. But where did your family come from before then? And my friend was quiet. There was no answer. That was one of my first introductions to understanding that there was something going on with the community, that they had a different history than I did. I remember, by the way, I sat next to Julius Erving's younger brother. Some of you are old enough to know who he was. And my older brother sat next to Julius Erving in homeroom. But later on, when I went to a political rally where Jesse Jackson was running for president, I heard him use the term African American. And I became extremely excited because now we were at least on the continent. I was in a position to tell you what village my family came from, my great-grandfather's name. We had records going back 17 generations. And I began to understand that something was happening, that there's something that needed to be explained, to be explored. And I will tell you that the first time I understood that there were Asian leaders in the world was when I saw a picture of Mao Zedong in the centerfold of a Black Panther paper. Prior to that, I had actually never known that there were Asian leaders. I thought it was Britain conquered Hong Kong, Opium War, back to Western civilization. That's what I was told. I took it home and showed my father, and my father said, yes, that is the leader of China. You might not agree with his politics, but that is the leader of China. And I will tell you that my experience as an adult at an event at IBM, where there was the first Asian American leadership convening that took place, the leadership of IBM got up and said that the convening was important because Asians did not know how to be leaders. And you can imagine yours truly raising her hand in a very un-Asian way and saying, so who runs Toyota? Who runs Japan? Who runs China? We don't know how to be leaders. I can guarantee you I was never invited. So that's just a little bit about me. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Kevin Jordan. As Wendy said, I'm Vice President for Diversity, Equity, Inclusive Excellence in CDO at Farmingdale State College. It's a pleasure to be here today. I love conversations like this, and I'll tell you why. I'm still suffering. I started here at LaGuardia. I first came here in 2013, and so I'm still suffering from the fact from waking up at 5 o'clock to make sure I could get here by 8:30. So I still wake up 5 o'clock every morning. And before I left my house, I put a load of laundry in the washing machine. And as I was on the train here, I thought about this conversation, this initial conversation, and all of a sudden, my mind started thinking about this conversation and the washing machine. And I realized, and I'm going to stand up because I like to be demonstrative. And I thought about it, and I said, you know, what gets clothes clean besides the detergent and the bleach and whatever else you put in the washing machine is the ability for the clothes, and don't bring a charge when I do this again, to rub against and agitate. That agitation cleans out the dirt. And that's why these conversations are important, because that agitation gets the laundry clean. Without it, you're gonna put on yesterday's dirt, last week's dirt. I've been in higher education for about 42 years. And I've done this work, actually, if I'm gonna be honest, I started this work on June 22nd, 1956, the day I was born. Because that's when I realized that because who I am and the fact that my skin has been so wonderfully kissed by my ancestors from the Nile, that there are going to be problems for me in this country. So I started the work back then. But in the process, one of the things I discovered, okay, why this work is important, why it's good for conversation, why everybody needs to be a part of this discussion. Everybody do this. Take your, let me see you do it. Okay? You see how close that skin is to you? That's why these conversations are important. Because these conversations will allow you to realize that you let nothing between this and what it's attached to. And the way that's done is to have these conversations, to have these discussions, okay, to discover not only who you are, but how other individuals understand who you are, and make sure you tell your story completely. We are Homo sapiens. We have these big heads because we're people of thought, rational thought. But we're also Homo narrans. We're people who love stories because they define who we are. So that's why I'm excited about this work. In the 42 years I've been in higher education, you name it, I've done it. I've been VP of Student Affairs and been all over, okay? But it's these discussions in my current role as Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusive Excellence that gets me most excited. Why? Because I love to agitate. Why? Why do I love to agitate? Because I want some clean clothes. I don't want to be wearing yesterday's nasty stuff. Okay, so I'm very happy to be here, and I congratulate Wendy on creating this conversation. When I was here in 2013, there was no executive director of DEI, nothing. And so I'm very happy when I come back to see that changes are being done. And I believe through the leadership of the executive leadership here, that this is only the beginning and the best is yet to come. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon, good evening, good morning. Well, because this is going to be on the loop, right? It will be on your website. So I'm Mira Rivera. I'm a rabbi. ordained from the Jewish Theological Seminary. And I'm also a board certified chaplain. Keep up my dues and do all my continuing ed so I can be of service to the community at large in the capacity of a chaplain. Mira Rivera is my name. I am Jewish. I did not take my spouse's last name, and I carry on my name so that I could be connected to my ancestors. But born in Detroit, my father was working in the automotive industry at that time, and my mom was a new doctor, doctor of medicine. They had a commuter marriage. She was working in DC. But when I was 2 years old, they had this idea, as many immigrant families do, that it would be more sage of them to send me to the Philippines, where they had both come from at different generations, and where I would grow up with my maternal grandma, and there would be a garden, there would be cousins to play with and all that. So that's what happened. And so I came back as because at a certain point I was an undocumented student there. I would travel back and forth with this privilege of the American passport. And every time I would go back there, they would say, what is she doing here? I mean, she's on a tourist visa. And my aunt and uncle would say, you just let it be, she's with family. And so just like an undocumented person, when it was time to go to college, I had to come back to the United States. So I grew up being sent to Catholic schools. But all throughout my childhood, I kept hearing references to my grandma. Oh, your Lola, that's like abuela, your Lola does X because she's Judío. In Judío and Spanish, which was the third language of the Philippines, meant Jew. It would be, she's making noise when everybody's doing their family rosary, and she's coughing, and then eventually she moves the iron chairs, and then she leaves the room because she's Judío. So I grew up with that, and not knowing what that really was, but just that they hated my grandma and they hated me because I was of her line. Many years later, when I found myself in New York City, and I had this longing really to become a teacher of the Jewish people, finally, after so many years, one rabbi in front of me finally asked me, okay, tell me where your ancestors got to and where did they come from before they got to X place. For the first time, right, I had been serving in Jewish communities as an educator for many years, myself and my spouse, but no one ever bothered to ask. And so I said yes. From my mom's side, they came from Spain and all that. And this we know because there was we spoke Spanish, but yes, people would say to us that your Spanish was not like what you would say Hochdeutsch, it was not the alta sociedad, it was bastardized Spanish. And in that bastardized Spanish that I inherited, my grandmother, for example, would call me her gabay. And she was failing of eyes, or of sight, and I was the one who would accompany her. She would hold on to me. I would put drops in her eyes, her medicine. And gabay was, I thought, like, okay, her helper. But lo and behold, of course, later on, I find out that gabay in the Jewish community meant the person who was helping correct the Torah reader, right? And the person who knew everybody in the community and would bring them for honors. And so this intersection of Jewish and us being Filipinos was something that I had to uncover. And the only way I uncovered it, believe it or not, was by applying to rabbinical school. Because nobody would look at my face, even my interest in Sephardi history, and even give me time of day. So being here in the United States for me was also an understanding of who I was as an Asian person. I went into the arts. I was dancing, and my first mentor who I met was Japanese American, and I had the good fortune of dancing for Yuriko. Yuriko Kikuchi was her full name, blessed memory, and she passed last year at 103 years old. And she was the interpreter of Martha Graham's oeuvre of work. And when I came to New York, I had the good fortune of being there at the right time as these pieces from the 1930s, performed by 13 women, and all these pieces were being reworked by Yuriko. And my own understanding of being Asian and my own understanding of being with a Japanese person in America was really jogged, because our history in the Philippines was that while the United States was engaged in a war in Europe against the Axis powers, the Axis powers also extended to the Philippines. So our experience from my family of World War II were bayonets, slashing through sacks of rice, and rice from our farm just like spilling into the sand, and people having to pick up grain by grain. So there I was, knowing that history and my grandma's stories of running, when the kamikaze planes were flying, and my first mentor at the Martha Graham School and Company was a Japanese woman. So I myself had to work through changing my idea about who was who and who was in front of me, what was their heritage. Now, as a rabbi, my work is constantly that. So I'm a Rabbi-in-Residence at the Jewish Community Center in Harlem, and I'm also Rabbi-in-Residence of the LUNAR collective, weareasianjews.org. How did that happen? I never could pass for anyone else but me, whenever I entered into any space, and including Jewish spaces. When I would enter into a Jewish space, if I didn't have my guitar strapped on my back, if I didn't have my spouse beside me, who was of German and Hungarian descent, then I was either the caregiver, or I was either the babysitter, or I was either the help. So this continued all through rabbinical school, all through, up to now, so that I myself will not enter Jewish space just cause. And with, thank goodness for security measures and all that, I prefer to email somebody of importance in the institution, have my name at the door, so that I say there will not be awkward moments. So I come here today bringing to you in raw form the work that I do. And I also have to say that during the time of COVID, when I was working with what I would call a normative European-centric synagogue, that would have a woman, that would have a woman of color as an associate rabbi. I mean, all of those things, believe me, right? These are all like breaking barriers. I found myself during all that time, yes, doing great work, while also, when I should be sleeping, doing the work with of diversity and equity, and just trying to keep the Jews of color like me safe and sane. Doing all of that, of course, on top of the work that I'm doing, serving predominantly white community. And at a certain point, I said, when I was entering the end of my 7th year in my rabbinate, I said, basta. You're good. You've proven it. You know you can do this work. And then I said to myself, save your soul. And I submitted my resignation, and I said to myself, I'm now just going to work to the best of my capacity for the uplift of Jews of color, where they would have me, for the uplift and collaborative work with BIPOC communities and with Jewish communities who would be interested in doing some of this reparation work and giving us the space without us having to shed blood. Zero, that's it for now.
Well, thank you, Joyce, Kevin, and Rabbi Mira for giving us some insight into you and into your background that will help us now to sort of frame the conversation that we're about to have. So, my first question to each of you is, why do you believe that bias and discrimination are on the rise now, particularly as it relates to your own identity? Kevin.
Well, bias and discrimination has always existed. It's nothing new. But I think it's on the rise because this country is allowing it to be on the rise. If you take a look at what's happening nationally and internationally, it's okay to wear hatred as a badge of honor. Okay? And it's amazing. That question triggered something else that took place recently. I discovered that individuals with whom I've had and still have a relationship with, okay, who may not have my identity, I had the shock of my life when an individual who I thought was a really close friend of mine, all of a sudden started using the vernacular of where this country is going. That was an eye-opener. So it says to me that it's always been here. But when you're in an environment where there are no penalties to display your bias and your discrimination, okay, then you discover the fact that it's always been around, and not only that, how deeply it's embedded, not only in society, but deeply embedded in the DNA of individuals that you didn't think. That's why these conversations are important. We got to get that laundry clean.
The Page Act of 1875. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that in determining whether the immigration of any subject of China, Japan, or any Oriental country to the United States is free and voluntary, it shall be the duty of the Consul General residing at the port from which it is proposed to convey such subjects to ascertain whether such immigrant has entered into a contract or agreement for a term of service within the U.S. for lewd or immoral purposes. So the first law that came into being against the entrance of people from China, Japan, or any Oriental country, right, was really to determine and to really identify us as our reason, our raison d'etre for being was for prostitution or criminal purposes. I saw this, and then I remembered also being in Montgomery and at one of the museums and seeing just a small square, just a copy of one of those anti-black laws, anti-Asian laws, and my knees went weak because it said, I finally understood why my father never married. I did not marry until he met my mom, and he married at such a late stage. So I'm bringing this up because it's so deep in our history, right? For Filipinos, there's this word called manong. Manong means brother, elder brother. And it refers to Filipinos who had come from the north, from the Ilocos provinces. And I say that it's still there, right? The discrimination against us and the persists. And what I've also experienced is that no matter how many DEI trainings, I'm going to say in some of the Jewish spaces that I know, money is going to be thrown at it, and like big speakers and and scholars who've written tomes and tomes. I check it after a couple of years and they tell me it's still the same. So I know that this discrimination is going on out there, but I'm also concerned with the internal and the internalized discrimination.
Joyce?
Yeah, as was just said, discrimination and these biases have always been there in one form or another, in more horrific forms at some times than at other times. And I would say that part of it is that there is a perception that there are a lack of resources and that others become threats or competition for those resources. Oftentimes when communities of color are scapegoated, it is because of the failure of American leadership. Let me give you 2 examples. One, you have a situation where over 1 million people died under the leadership of the past administration. Yes, it's possible that the virus started in China. Let's assume for argument's sake that that is true. But who was in control and who did not take action when the virus reached our shores? It was the failure of American leadership. Right after, we had a situation where the Japanese industries, particularly in the automotive industry, was highly competitive, and their cars, in fact, were preferred by American consumers. There was a young man by the name of Vincent Chin who was out celebrating prior to his wedding at the age of 27, who was murdered by 2 US automakers because the Japanese competed against American companies and they were afraid of losing their jobs. The young man happened to be Chinese. You know what the value of his life was? A $3,000 penalty and no time served. That was the value of an Asian man's life. And again, it was the failure of American leadership, the failure of our industry to understand how to be competitive, the failure of our industry to invest instead of milking the product, not doing the R&D that allowed other countries to become competitive. And we are seeing that same failure of American leadership over and over again, making it difficult for people to have the kinds of education that's necessary to stay competitive for the high-paying jobs and so on. So again, they are scapegoating our communities of color because of the failure of American leadership, and this is a way of diverting attention from what's truly happening. That is one perspective that I think that we have to consider.
Granted, thank you. Thank each of you for your insightful answers. It sort of leads me into what's next, and you've each sort of touched on it in a way. So from Rabbi reading the first law that you spoke about, and how different populations are framed, would each of you take just a moment to speak to the historical and current proliferation of beliefs in and use of stereotypes to marginalize different populations, and also share your ideas about how to dismantle these beliefs and thereby increase respect and value for self and others. I'd like to start with you, Rabbi.
The way we tell our story, the cleaning up of our stories, so that so that we have washed our hands, like too much washing, too much hand washing too, right? So I'm going to refer to this, for example. When it's Martin Luther King Day, I'm going to speak for Jewish communities because that's what I'm representing. And believe me, I am such a sliver of a sliver, right? I am a sliver of a sliver of a sliver. So in liberal Jewish communities in these New York areas, MLK brings on an outreach to the communities. Our Black neighbors, there would be kumbaya events in synagogues and outside. And then the rest of the time after that, quiet. Inside the Jewish community, we will be speaking about the relationship of Jews with the Black community, particularly the collaboration with the Reverend, the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And so somehow this narrative of Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a rabbi in my seminary on 122nd Street, becomes the dominant language, right? So now we see, so in Jewish communities, we have always been there. We have always partnered with Black communities. You know, we were down in the South doing work for civil rights. Because look, we have Heschel. And then it ends there. So as if like what he did then and what Jewish activists then in the civil rights movement was enough. We don't even look further back in our history that the first Sephardi synagogue, the first synagogue that still stands in American soil in Rhode Island, at some point, the senior leader, spiritual leader, was part of 2 slave trades going in the transatlantic. Nor even in the community where I raised my children, right? The narrative of Abraham Joshua Heschel, because he was the teacher of the rabbi that rejuvenated it. They forget the history that during the time of Lincoln, a rabbi associated with that community taught this unthinkable idea that it was a God-given right for people to have slaves, to own slaves, preached from a synagogue, preached from the pulpit. Now that story is shameful, and that story should be juxtaposed with the Heschel story. It should be juxtaposed with what we are doing today, what Jewish communities have done today during in 2020 when the country went into an uprising. So the whitewashing of the story, the ironing, right? Ironing the pleats of the story, I think is part of this problem.
Joyce?
Yeah, so in terms of the history, I've talked briefly about the Chinese Exclusion Act and so on, and that has, in fact, had a major impact, I think, on the civic engagement of the Asian community, for example. The Asian community is a fairly new community in the United States. Historically, only 105 Chinese were allowed into this country each year. Only 100 people of Asian Indian descent were allowed into the country each year. And so growing up, I seldom saw another Chinese person until I was in Chinatown. First time I ever met a Korean was probably in 1970 or so when I was going to college. Because up until 1965, the bulk of the migration to the United States was in favor of Western Europe. After 65, the laws changed. However, the migration still favored those that had money or education. And it took a number of years for the pipeline to fill before we started to see a very diverse Asian population. But one of the things that I want to relate back to the stories that we tell, as the rabbi mentioned, because this is extremely important. There are not enough of us at the table to make sure that our narratives are heard. So, for example, in the case of the Peter Lim case, now it's a very controversial case. There was a young Black man who was killed in a darkened stairwell when a rookie cop of Asian heritage had a gun out of his holster, which probably violated the protocols. The gun went off. We don't really quite know why, whether he accidentally pulled the trigger or he didn't properly have it locked. The bullet hit something, a wall, ricocheted, and killed this young African-American man. This Chinese officer was prosecuted. There were members of the Chinese and other communities that came out to protest. And the way that the press presented it was that this was Asian against Black communities. That was not, in fact, the case. The Asian community came out to protest because they saw the difference between how this Asian officer was treated compared to how the white officer who was videoed applying an illegal chokehold and killed a man, deliberately applying that chokehold, was treated versus how this other officer was treated. Whenever you see the story written in the Asian press, it is written in the context of the tragedy of two families. And so again, the press has a tendency to present it in a way that makes us feel that this is a conflict between communities, when in fact it is not. As a matter of fact, I think that what happens in cases like this, again, the Asian community is fairly new to this country. They do not have necessarily an understanding of the racialized the nature of this country the way that I may have, because I grew up here and in the civil rights movement, right in the middle of the civil rights movement. You get here, the bulk of the people in New York City, 71% of Asians are foreign born. Nationally, 59% are foreign born. And they may not be aware of all of the things that are going on. So that is not in defense of what happened whatsoever, but you can see the difference in terms of how the rules are applied when you are a person of color. And forgive me for sounding angry. In all the things that I've seen, in all the years that I've been around, I cannot help but be angry because, as a rabbi mentioned, it's the same old thing over and over again, you know. And I do need to apologize. I will have to leave at 12:30. I do apologize for that.
Noted.
The first comment I want to make is it's dangerous when you just rely on a single story. That's dangerous. And when the single story has been written poorly, that's really dangerous. Okay? And what's even worse than really dangerous is when you have a single story and you rob individuals of knowing their history. That's disgusting. Agitating. So that's the first point I want to make. And then secondly is that when you have that single story that has been poorly written, then what happens is you build an environment that has worked for this country for decades, centuries, and that is divide and conquer. And it's based upon the fact if other identities are not represented truthfully in the single story, then they are to be attacked. That's dangerous. And what even makes it more dangerous, and I believe Joyce had mentioned about leadership and resources and things of that nature, what makes it dangerous is that single story and that attitude that's attached to it becomes the ruling power of leadership. And what do I mean by that? You know, when it comes to DEI work, you cannot blink. You can't blink. Because what makes the work really difficult, okay, is when it isn't embraced by leadership. And secondly, okay, when leadership may not openly say that they don't want to be a part of it, but their behavior exhibits it. You know, there's an expression that people use all the time. Do you see what I'm saying? And I brought that up mainly because that if you are true to DEI work, okay, then I ought to see what you're saying. But if what you're saying is not exhibited in your behavior, there's a problem. And folk like that, I tell them, don't walk behind me, you walk in front of me, something behind me. Okay? But if we could just get to the point where there's not one single story, but it's a conglomeration of stories, then I think we could appreciate, you know, you mentioned Rabbi Heschel, his concept of radical amazement. You know, that is just appreciating the fact that democracy is a conglomeration of stories that are not just tolerated, but are appreciated and somehow are woven into the system.
Okay, so see, y'all are gonna make me agitate now. So, and I'm glad you talked about the stories and how they are woven. Here's where I want to go a little bit deeper. Oftentimes, the stories that are told about others, about other populations, about other groups, are based on negative or created ideas about who those people are. So, for someone like me who identifies as a Black woman, I'm often told that I have to be careful about how I say what I need to say, or I might be described as being an angry Black woman. And based on the experiences that I have every right to be angry, but I'm not allowed to do that. So I'm told to bring my authentic self, but just within this frame, lest you be claimed to be angry. Or the other stereotypes of, you know, the Jezebel who's promiscuous, or the nurturer, and these were all positions that we were historically forced into, but then blamed for, right? And so I'm sure that in other marginalized groups, whether by race or ethnicity, by gender identity, there are all these similar, or parallel, I should say, stereotypes by which people are described and framed, and therefore how they are dealt with and interacted with by others. how do we dismantle those beliefs that continue to be woven into the fabric of society, this country, and dare I say, this institution? Anyone?
Wow, so,
Oh, okay, go ahead, Joyce.
okay, so that's quite a question, because there are stereotypes and there are stereotypes. But let me, and I love the comment by my colleague there about dangerous stories. Well, let me tell you a couple of stories in terms of, from my perspective. You know, there is a man that looks like he's gonna run for president, who doesn't seem to want African American history taught or understood or learned by anyone. Well, he obviously doesn't care about Black lives. He should not care about Italian lives either. One of the biggest lynchings in this country were of people from a similar heritage. Did he know that? If he knew that, would he begin to understand what it's like to have your family treated as if they're not human, be dragged out in the street and brutalized that way? Oh, by the way, he happens to be of a certain religion. Does he not know that when John F. Kennedy ran for president, and I remember this as a kid, his loyalty to this country was challenged because he was Catholic. He was probably more loyal to the Pope than to the United States. And in the meantime, their family had given the life of at least one brother in service of this country in the military. You know, by the way, I had a great uncle, a granduncle, and two uncles that served as well. You know, but I'm not American. I'm one of them. And then, you know, there's this, I guess you could call her a political pundit. I don't know if I would even give her a title like that. She tells Nikki Haley, who is of East Asian descent, Indian descent, and it doesn't matter whether you agree with politics or not, to go back where she came from. She was born in this country. I need to remind this woman that she claims Puritan heritage on her mother's side. Her mother's side of the family left the country because of religious persecution. And by the way, I'd like to see their passport and visa. And then we have, on her other side of the family left Ireland because of the potato famine. And they came to this country, were not well received because of their religion. They were called all sorts of derogatory names. But she doesn't know this history, you see? Because if she did, she would never make remarks like this. And so when we talk about dangerous stories, the danger is that there's one side that's being given a privileged story, given positive attributes, while others of us are being given negative attributes. And so, as my colleague just said, the story needs to be a conglomerate, both positive and negative. We need to talk about our contributions. America is great because of us, all of us. And so I'll stop. I'm sorry, I am angry and I can't see this. Put it back in the box.
First of all, you know, there's nothing wrong with being angry. I don't apologize for being angry and never will. Okay, particularly when you try to attack my existential reality of who I am. Yes, it's not being angry, it's protecting myself and my person. Okay? Now, the issue is how I decide to exercise that anger. And there are some people that will choose to exercise anger in some physical way. But I choose to exercise my anger and my disappointment and to channel that energy into conversation. Okay? So there's nothing wrong with being angry. Absolutely not. First of all, if you deny that, it's gonna kill you. And that's the reality of it, you know? It's better out than in. Okay? But how you channel that anger, okay, to open up people's eyes and not knock them shut. That's the key. That's the key. And once again, it goes back. This work goes back. Whoever does this work, you have to have a really healthy sense of self. You know, some of my colleagues, they say, oh, I love doing the DEI work, and they go off on it and all of that nice stuff. I said, well, okay, do you love being attacked? Do you love being marginalized? Do you love being the scapegoat? Okay? And if you could somehow tell me that all of that you enjoy, then you're ready to do DEI work. You're ready to do the work. But the problem is DEI in today's lens has been so watered down until you don't taste the D, you don't taste the E, and you don't taste the I. Okay? To get that flavor back in, and once again, it takes conversations like these to put the flavor back into the work. It takes honesty, it takes integrity, and it takes your shoes having thick soles. Because there's a lot of walking, literally and figuratively, that's involved.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. So from my little piece that I want to share, I just want to focus actually on the DEI work, right? How we deal still with stereotyping whilst doing DEI work. So 2020 in June, our world was collapsing and being ignited by the murder of George Floyd. Our emails and our texts in the Jews of color community just lit up. Speak for this, write about this, send out a statement here, and all that. And we were, first of all, as people of color, going out into the streets too, and then continuing to serve the community that was predominantly white in synagogues, right? All of that happening at the same time. And when we started to say we will be selective about whom we answer, how can you do that? We're finally inviting you, right? And people were not sleeping. People were like falling apart. For us to even say, we will choose to respond to whom we would like to respond to was a radical step. Giving us training in DI work taught by Jews of color, for Jews of color, for example, or with BIPOC communities. This was like, what? Why do you want to be separatist? And we had to weather that. The Asian hate started just spreading all over the country. And again, also I was asked, write something for us as our statement. I said, please, so many statements have gone around. You could actually take one of those statements that have been going out and just change the details, cut and paste, right? Cut and paste it and send it out. I want a conversation. We can do a webinar. We could do a Zoom. Let's have a conversation so you will know an Asian American in your midst. Let us break some barriers down. No, they want that piece of paper. They want that statement. So even in the DEI work that we do, we are supposed to serve. Because we were invited to the table. We should be, clapping our feet and clapping our hands, right? That we have been invited to the table. So I'm just gonna focus on that because the other is like, it's so large. Okay, last one I'm gonna share with you. I danced, right? So in my world, like I said, Yuriko Kikuchi was like my person. She was the first Asian American to dance for Martha Graham. And it was during the war when she was brought into the company. But she was brought into the company, why? Not only because she could dance, but because she could sew. So, this is who we are. We have to have multi-talents. She could sew, she could be a seamstress, she got into the company, plus she was also the body in whom Martha demonstrated her technique, right? Can't be just one thing. And I did, I had my own foray into the Broadway dance world, and during that time, there were only 2 roles, right? When I danced for her in the recreation of The King and I, the whole the tone of the production was so respectful of like the strong Asian woman. Changed the directors, and suddenly we were being told, oh no, you have to shuffle. Shuffle? The women never shuffled in The King and I, like shuffle like this. We never shuffled. Thai people, that's the whole story of The King and I, were proud people, never been colonized peoples, but that changed. Or you could be a whore. Miss Saigon was the show, and those are the only 2 choices. So I went into the Jewish world.
I want to agitate a little bit more, but Joyce, I know that you need to go, and so I just want to give you an opportunity to provide us with any parting words of wisdom as we continue this work here at LaGuardia.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so grateful to have been here and to hear from my colleagues. I will try to be better at channeling my anger and what you suggested. But I must say that we've got to start at the beginning. We are starting too often to try to fix things when it's too late. This history, the stories have to be taught from the time a child enters school. And so that they begin to hear this and they open their minds. That is the only way that we will ever produce children who are compassionate, empathetic, and open to others, other individuals and other cultures. If we try to infuse this, by the time they're in middle school, it's already too late. For many of our own children in the BIPOC communities, when we finally learn about our own rich heritage, we're in college, and we had gone for years and years not knowing the greatness of many of the members of our own communities. And that has an impact on how we perceive ourselves and how we allow others to perceive us. And then there's just one other thing I think we need to keep an eye on. There is such a thing as a prescriptive stereotype. When you are assigned a stereotype, they don't like it when you don't act like that stereotype. So when I raised my hand at that IBM meeting, they said, holy cow, let's not invite her again. She's not acting like a demure little Asian woman. And then I learned to project from teaching. You don't need to give me a mic, you can hear me. So I say to all of you, thank you so much for being engaged in this work and continue the fight. And I hate to call it that. I hate to keep using the word struggle. This is not, my kids will say those are words from olden times. Well, maybe we need to come up with new words that will engage this younger generation. But believe you me, the struggle and the fight continues. And I thank all my brothers and sisters in this room for all of their efforts as well. So I will sign off at this point, and again, thank you everyone.
Joyce, thank you, and please let me know that all is well. appreciate you being here and for your words of wisdom. I want to go back, agitate just a little bit more. So, Dr. Jordan, you said that bias and discrimination are not new. Obviously, we know that. And Rabbi, you mentioned how different groups and populations are often pitted against each other, and making the suffering of one more or less important than any of the others. And that could be along racial lines, gender lines, any way that you can sort of marginalize a group. But what's beyond conversation? Conversation is great, but what do we do beyond that? Because we can talk and talk and talk, it's great, but what do we do about it, right? What advice would you give us as a campus community about moving beyond conversation and actually doing meaningful work? And could you give us some examples of how you've advocated for change in the work that you do?
There are certain civilities that we've let go. When we talk about conversation, we think of this, right? We think of this. We think of formal gatherings. And once the formal gatherings happen, then is the box checked? It's the box checked already, right? So I'm gonna just share with you a couple of things I've learned from other organizers. Call. Talk to each other. Don't just rely on social media, right? Zoom has helped us, but we can hide behind social media and eventually it blows up. Take the time actually to call somebody again and try to arrange a face-to-face meeting. And when we're together, listen deeply. Yes, I have the arm that also like this. I wanna say, and oftentimes the person is not even finished speaking. What does it mean to actually listen deeply and actually to process something before suddenly jumping in? Or like we're just waiting for them to finish, I already have something I want to say. These are things we have lost. To say please, to say thank you, to say I apologize or accept. Sometimes the pain is so big, so huge, that we just want to leave. I'm one of those. I used to like sit by the door so I can just really exit. But saying hello, making yourself go and say hello and greet and say, I forgot your name. Self-knowledge and self-care is really, again, words that are just banded, right? Just thrown away. Only you know what you need. You can't expect your grandma to be in the movement. You have to be your own grandma. If grandmas are, good in your psyche, take care of your own self. And again, please be civil, be nice to the best of your capacity. That's my big advice to do this work. And get to know the stories. I heard of this one, PICO, one of these organizing initiatives forever. A friend of mine said they once gathered and they had a whole program for like 3 days. They just ditched it. All they did was let each and every person say their story and just marinated. They just blew out the whole program for that whole meeting. And they said that group stayed so tight and solid. And the same thing for me. I've experienced that. If I know the story, I might not remember the details, right? But I will show up for you. Because you know what? Because you're my sister.
Everyone in this room is an example of the next step. You show up. You show up, you become a part of the conversation, okay? Secondly, and this is in no way in order of importance, is you have to take some time to find out your genuine self, and that's your history. what makes you unique. Howard Thurman, an African-American theologian who was one of the mentors of Dr. Martin Luther King, made a powerful statement. He said that if you don't discover your genuine self, what's going to happen is you're going to live the rest of your life being controlled because other people are going to be pulling the strings. You show up. I was in a situation where we were having some conversation around DEI. And it was some nice conversation. You know, I appreciated it. And then I noticed that after the conversation, there were about 4 or 5 people that were part of the conversation, that the other people were dismissed, and they were asked to stick around. What did I do? I stuck around, even though I was not asked to. Because I knew that I needed to know what was going on in the meeting after the meeting. So I stuck around. And it was a little difficult for them. But you know what? I stuck around, and I know that they didn't want to talk about what they wanted to talk about with me there. But guess what? I canceled that meeting. You show up. You don't be afraid. You don't back down. I believe it was in the 50s, Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rogers, they did a play. I believe it was South Pacific. And they were told that you should not use the theater to make a social statement, because there was one particular song that they thought was inappropriate for the theater. But it was the song that really made the most powerful statement. You have to be carefully taught. But you know what? Even though they were criticizing that the theater is not the place to make a social statement, why not? People are there. That's the most appropriate place and time to make a statement because you got an audience. Why are you going to sing that song to an empty theater? Chairs can't protest. You got to be bold and you have to show up. And I want to just share quickly, if you don't mind, a story that happened, an incident that happened to me recently. I live on Long Island. And I'm not going to even get into the history of Long Island. Okay? And I happen to live in a community where there's not a lot of folk that look like me. And I agitate, I walk around, and as a sidebar, when George Floyd died, it was really kind of funny, both funny and sad. I was amazed that as I would walk around, and my neighbors they'd make a point. Hi! I mean, would stop. Oh, how are you today? Didn't even know my name. How are you today? I found that kind of comical. I didn't have a gun. No, man. I didn't. I was just walking, trying to drop off the pandemic pounds. But in that same neighborhood, I took a walk, and it was around the evening time, and there were 2 white boys that were walking, and they were chatting, looking at one another, and chatting, and then one of them turned and saw me. They stopped, and so did I. They didn't know, they couldn't make a decision. Do we let him pass by? Or do we pass by? So they were and they were looking at me. And because I do this work, and I understand that type of behavior, it wasn't until I said, hey, come on. Then they cautiously passed by, okay? And I got angry, but I couldn't get angry at them. I had to get angry at the parents because they were taught that. They were taught that. So to get back to what I said originally, show up. Be a part of the conversation. Learn that there's a difference, and I say this all the time. When I mentioned earlier about DEI work and it being watered down, a lot of DEI stuff, people want it to be nice. But you know what? We got to move from nice to necessary. Nice people will forget after it's over. Necessary, they won't. And we are at the point now where we have to do more necessary than nice. You know what? It's nice to be necessary.
Okay, so definite pointers about how to do the work, to show up, to do the work, to be carefully taught, but also to carefully and deeply listen. What are the long-term effects if we ignore the necessary, if we ignore this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I think the most dangerous, the way a society treats its vulnerable population is how they view humanity. So the worst thing that will happen is that if we don't show up and do and be active and align what we think, what we feel, and what we do, head, heart, and hands. If we don't align that, then guess what? And it's sad because I never thought in my soon-to-be 67 years on Earth that I would have to say that if this work does not continue, there's a possibility that this country will be more inhumane than what it is. And ultimately, it's just destruction.
Ourselves, our children, right? I've always thought that at a certain point I said, whatever trauma I inherited from my parents, the buck stops here. Yes, I do carry some of that trauma, but I sure am not going to be the one that's going to be wielding that bludgeon or that those insults or just shaming people. That which I learned, that which was passed on to me, not me. It's stopping. So if a lot of us just say, whatever that trauma is, that it's so easy, so attractive it seems to be able to kill, crush, and destroy another person. Nah, I want to be able to sleep. Okay, so I like sleeping better at night. And it's self-preservation, but there it is.
Okay, awesome. I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask a few questions. We have a little bit of time before I give you an opportunity to provide us with some last words of wisdom. Does anyone in the audience have a question for our panelists? Yes.
Hi, I want to thank you for sharing your stories. I'm Dr. Chelsea Delrion. I'm a historian, so I am very excited to see you all talking about the importance of history. That's what I always talk to my students about. We understand where we are in this world today by understanding our stories individually and collectively, so I really appreciate you sharing your stories and emphasizing the importance of broader stories. I would like to hear from you a bit more specifically about how you define diversity and equity and inclusion. This conversation has been largely about race and ethnicity, and this is critical to LaGuardia because our student population is almost entirely students of color. But these students are also low income, they're also women, they're disabled, and they're queer. There have been a lot of examples that have been brought up that sort of talk about the importance of education, right? Joyce mentioned the importance of these educations starting the moment children enter school. Right now, there are hundreds of laws around the country that are trying to prevent LGBT education in all levels of education, K-12 education and college. There are 150 bills specifically targeting trans folks, especially trans youth, trying to prevent them from having access to sports, to education, and to healthcare. And so I would like to hear, if your vision of DEI really is inclusive, intersectionally so, and if so, how do you envision that? Because this conversation has talked about race, but it hasn't really gone beyond to talk about the way that race is intersecting with all of these other categories that shape our students' lives here at LaGuardia.
Thank you. I would ask for DEI training, not, you have this initiative right now, right? So it's gotta happen, but follow up to this, I would love, and this is what I ask of Jewish institutions. When they come to me, do you have any teachers for the Hebrew school who could teach the little guys, about diversity, equity, and inclusion? I just say to them, no, I will not send anybody to you. The training has to begin with the board, the funders, the staff, right? The teachers, yes, but really up top. That's what I've seen, right? To ask the people who are impacted to do the work. That's sort of. I'm so glad I don't know all of the slang, because the slang is like really messed up in my mind, so I will not say it. So it's like walking backwards. So that's what I share with you, what has been successfully being asked of Jewish institutions. Start from the top. Don't ask the kids to do the work for you. Do they all do it? Not necessarily, but that's my spiel.
If you take a look at it, and Professor, I'm sure being in history, you will appreciate this. If you take a look at the history of DEI work, it started off with just diversity. You want to know my definition of diversity? I do it a few times a year when I have to call IR and get a count of enrollment. Bean counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for the most part, people felt good about that. Oh, we're diverse. And there was a hard stop. But the problem came when equity and inclusion were attached to it. Because now you're looking at the issue of policy. Okay? Now, if you look historically, and I'm going to use, for example, the civil rights movement. All right? If you look at it historically and what the civil rights movement did and how it morphed was the fact that the core mission of the civil rights movement was able to be adopted by all identities. Because the issue is, we're talking about race and ethnicity, but what are we fighting for? The right for our identity to be appreciated. So when individuals, when individuals want to know, when they talk about intersectionality, I use that as an example. King, okay, we know the work he's done along with others, okay? But in 1968, when he was killed, he was there because he now was concerned about class. Okay? So we have to be very, very careful in terms of, I want to say this nicely. Give me 2 seconds. Okay, got it. I can be raw. We have to be careful in terms of how we take DEI and what is the ultimate purpose of DEI? We got diversity. Look around this room. Okay? But ultimately, to be able to sit around the table where policy is being discussed, where resources are being decided, okay? And that is the connecting point, because what will happen is if we don't sit around that table, okay, and we see it in instances today, that there is a limited amount of resources that are given to particular people who are diverse, that we wind up cannibalizing ourselves because we're trying to grab a little bit of resource from other people that need to be recognized just like ourselves. So the key is, all right, that when a slice of bread is given to 500 different identities, we gotta be in the room around the table and reach over and say, oh, I'll take the loaf. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.